This is your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, and you are listening to Season 4 of the Floor Rejects podcast, The Wells House Phenomenon. Hi, welcome back to the Floor Rejects podcast. I realized I don't really need to introduce myself because it says so in the intro, so I'm not going to. I don't need to say I'm your friendly neighborhood anything anymore. I love that for me. Welcome back, though. We are covering Chapter 16 today. I don't remember the title. You'll hear it in a second. But Chapter 15 last week was a culmination of several chapters worth of tension and intrigue, which ended up with Edward and Warren almost like going hard in the paint, but that sounds like something that's bad. I don't know where I got that. Edward and Tom, nope, they're brothers. Ooh, it's going well today. Sorry, I'm a little off. It ended up with Warren and Edward having sex, banging it out mouth style, so, you read into that what you will. Not you being able to see my back in this mirror. Ugh. Anyway, that's what we had last week. It wasn't really a week where a bunch of information was revealed so much as a really major plot point happened, or at least the beginning of several major plot points kind of merging together. So that was last week. We're going to get into Chapter 16 this week, and we're going to talk about it. If you are trying to figure out if you even care about this chapter, this one, there's a lot more exposition, much like there was a couple chapters ago with Thomas in the woods. So, yeah, that's right. So it should be interesting for you if that's interesting to you at all. I would like to ask off the top here, not to be that guy, but if you've got a second and you want to leave me a review, you want to share me with your queer friends, do anything like that, I would much appreciate it. I just want feedback. I want to hear people's opinions. I want to know what people think, not so much about the audio quality or the constantly changing background or any of that stuff. But I would like constructive critiques or I don't want to say compliments, but maybe things that you like about things that I've written or I'm writing or that I'm working on, remembering, of course, that everything I bring to you is kind of a rough draft. If you know anyone that's into that, I would love it if you would share. Just share. I don't have to be your secret. Not me looking at the camera like that. I'm just trying to see if I'm ugly. Turns out I am. But it's an audio format if you're not watching the videos, so nobody has to know I'm ugly. Also, something I learned this week, I don't know how widespread this is. I don't know if it's the consensus, but I heard through the grapevine, the queer grapevine, that using substitutions, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it without repeating the problematic phrase in question. So we all know the phrase ladies and gentlemen. Well, a lot of people have, I say a lot because I hear it a lot, have in an attempt to, I guess, be more inclusive, included they, them, their pronouns and kind of replaced some of those words in like ladies and gentlemen, sometimes just ladies, sometimes just gentlemen, with those pronouns. I haven't really seen, except for in a couple places, but where I have seen it, some non-binary or trans folks have said, don't love that, not a fan of it. So, first of all, if anyone heard that and they were not a fan, I apologize, I am sorry, not going to do it again. Number two, giving you this information on the off chance that you say it, think it's fun, quirky, cute. I did. If it's hurting someone, I'm not going to do it. So I'm not going to do it anymore. Also, apologize for doing it at all. Didn't know. Might be. doing my best to educate myself. So, without further ado, let's jump into Chapter 16. My little clicker remote was on a delay. Okay, Chapter 16. Chapter 16, The Whole Truth. When Warren's eyes open and his memories pull back into clarity, he stares wide-eyed at the hulking back his face is pressed against. He prays that incubuses have a refractory period like humans and that Edward was asleep. When the man moves, Warren has to quickly mask his panic, and when he turns and they are face to face, Warren feels a hard shake run down his back.
Warren, my sweet Warren, you are so beautiful,
Edward says, throwing an arm over his confused lover.
Back at you?
Warren fails to sound sincere, but Edward doesn't seem to notice.
Should we do it again, War?
The deep voice asks, his lids growing low and fluttering against the pillowcase. Not tonight, Edward.
I doubt my heart could handle it.
Warren eases into his lies, and he found it disheartening when Edward doesn't respond but instead shuts his eyes, smiling as he falls asleep. Warren doesn't move for what feels like hours, but was really only a few minutes before he slowly moves his shoulders, testing the man across from him. When he doesn't stir, Warren continues to painstakingly, slowly slide from his grasp, freezing as Edward's arm hits the bed when Warren frees himself. The man begins to shift, and Warren's whole body runs cold for a moment until he rolls over with a sigh and pulls the covers up over himself. Warren then slowly puts his clothes back on, his sneakers in his hand to the door, where he immediately bolts around the back of the house towards the wood. He hadn't seen Thomas since that night he'd followed him. His little camp had been stone cold the next night, and no amount of searching had led him to his friend. He thought about bringing clothes and supplies to the site and leaving them, but knew that was a risk. He could tip off Edward and Lila to Thomas's location and condition. It could also give them evidence that he was more sentient than they thought. When he arrived, he was unsurprised but still disappointed to find that the coals were cold and no sign of movement. He turns to begin to search, ready to crunch through the underbrush in the quest for more answers, but his heart stops when he registers someone standing in his periphery. He turns slowly, preparing for some sort of struggle, but finds Thomas instead, sagging against a tree, his face ashen and tired in the moonlight, his still half-naked body quivering.
Jesus, Thomas, you scared the shit out of me.
Warren yelps, rushing to the man and immediately shouldering him as he nearly collapses. Guilt flares in his heart when he thinks of his decision not to leave supplies for him.
Sorry, I didn't even know if I would make it to you, or if it was you.
Thomas groans as Warren sits him down on the down tree near the little ring of rocks. Warren begins to gather up brush and twigs, creating a small cone. He was relieved to find a lighter in his pants pocket from smoking in the attic earlier. He flicks it, rushing to build up some warmth as Thomas sank farther and farther into himself. He looked like hell, his face no longer swollen but still black and blue. His cuts were red and irritated, and from the way he could barely walk, Warren was sure he wasn't going to make it much longer if he didn't have any help. The fire catches, giving Warren a chance to sit next to the broken body on the log as warmth began to radiate out into the clearing.
Thomas, you look really bad. What can I do? I wanted to bring you clothes and food, but I was worried it would just make things worse.
Warren asks, and Thomas looks at him seriously.
Nothing, Warren. Being near you is enough for now,
he says, and Warren can feel a spike of nervousness in his chest.
That's sweet, Thomas, but you have to...
Warren stops when Thomas chuckles bitterly.
I didn't mean it. Well, it is nice to... What I meant was that literally being near you is the best thing you can do to help me. Physical proximity to our humans is what keeps us going. That's why you can't leave for more than a few days a year. It's also why you were immediately requested. The longer we are operating from our quarry, the weaker we are. Just being close to you is helping me,
Thomas explains, to which Warren scoffs, feeling foolish.
So what do we do now? I have so many more questions.
Warren asks, pushing through his shame. Thomas gestures for him to go ahead, sitting up a bit straighter.
Okay. Where have you been?
He starts.
Hiding. Edward was looking for me when he wasn't with you, which reminds me, I didn't sense him nearby. Where is he?
Thomas returns.
He's asleep.
Warren explains, hoping he didn't have to say more, but Thomas asks him how he knows.
Because he's in my bed.
Warren says, and Thomas physically recoils. Warren puts his hands up.
I'm sorry, Thomas. It wasn't me. I mean, it was, but I couldn't help it. You know that.
Warren apologizes. Thomas settles back down, his eyes narrowing.
Warren, I'm not going to beat around the bush. What did you do with my brother? You weren't dreaming, were you?
His tone is serious. Warren decides this wasn't the time to be coy.
We blew each other. That's all. I was 100% awake and 100% stupid.
Warren tells him. Thomas leans forward.
That's good. Really good. As long as you're awake, that's all that matters. Now, what else?
Thomas is kind, not lingering on Warren's unaware screw-up.
Well, when I was out here the other night looking for you, which, by the way, how long do I need to stay out here for you to get better? I remembered that you said that that I had to do it willingly, like with my memories intact. If that's the case, how is it that Lila and the rest of you have managed to do this to every single one of my predecessors? Like, if they have to have all of their memories, I doubt they would just do it.
Warren asks, and Thomas bursts out into a laugh so outrageous he has to slap a hand over his mouth. Warren looks at him confused and a bit put off.
I'm sorry, Warren. I know that's a genuine question, but it's just, to my knowledge, most of your ancestors gave in right away, within days, all of them within weeks, except for one. Now that comes with some caveats. Technically, yes, you and your predecessors have to all be fully aware of their situation when they give in, but that doesn't mean we can't lie to you. We can lie to you in your dreams because that is the time in which your mind is clear, and therefore technically you still have full capability to decline or question and make uninhibited decisions. But we're still allowed to use human tricks on you. I say this with as much respect as I can give, but you human men are generally malleable. You don't seem to care much when a beautiful woman offers herself up to you in the middle of the night. Except you. You've withstood us long enough to put it together, or at least gain an ally to put it together with you.
Thomas says, putting a hand to his aching side after speaking for so long.
Can I look at it? Your side?
Warren asks. Thomas leans over obligingly and lifts his shirt. Warren puts a hand to his skin just to make sure his ribs weren't still protruding, but when he lifts his hand, Thomas moans, shivering as the skin underneath Warren's touch returns to normal. Warren stares at his hand in wonder, and Thomas looks down at his body just as confused as the man next to him.
That's new.
Thomas says under his breath. Warren smiles, his thoughts already pointed at fixing Thomas's battered body.
So you mean to tell me that not one of my family members cared to figure out what was happening?
Warren asks. Thomas smiles again, letting his shirt fall down.
Warren, I'm telling you I've never heard of this happening. Ever. The only reason I even know what happens if you break your family's pact is the rare occasion that the last eligible heir, regardless of sex, dies before the deal is completed. I've never heard of one of my people failing.
Thomas says. Warren nods. He scoots closer.
What if I ran back to the house, got you some supplies, at least? I mean, some pants, maybe?
Warren asks, looking down at Thomas's bare legs and feet which still shook.
Don't. It's a risk, and we don't actually need food. We just do it for appearances and pleasure. Don't need clothes either. We're preternaturally conditioned to run hot.
Thomas says.
Okay. At least take your shirt off so I can try and do it again, and you can tell me how in the hell some random yahoo from Kentucky is driving and becoming a challenge for an ancient race of demons. No offense.
Warren commands, and Thomas sheepishly begins to unbutton his shirt. As he does, he speaks.
Warren, I don't really know. I'm young. I haven't been around long enough to learn all the secrets. Best I can figure is it's a lucky accident. You're the first of your family members to be immune to my mother's wiles. Since she's so stubborn, she put me up to the task, but I'm bad at my job, I guess. All that bought you time, and fortunately Edward has a predilection to playing with his food.
Thomas lets his shirt fall to the ground, his body shivering from pain and weakness, not the cold as Warren had assumed.
I'm gonna touch your side again. Is there anything I can do to help otherwise?
Warren asks, placing both hands on Thomas's surprisingly warm skin.
Well,
Thomas hesitates, and Warren looks at him impatiently.
It's a lot of energy keeping up this form,
he says, and Warren pulls his hands back, watching the patch of skin he had been touching heal. He purses his lips.
So stop,
he says. Thomas scoffs, looking up at the moon, which was beginning to dip towards the top of the trees.
Seriously, I think I've seen enough to take it,
Warren says. Thomas shrugs, standing shakily.
Get back. I've never done this near a human,
Thomas says, and Warren backs towards the edge of the clearing. Thomas breathes in deep, wincing in pain, and closes his eyes, turning his face towards the sky. For a moment, nothing happens, but then a quiet whooshing sound rises from around them. It grows, not to a roar, but akin to the level of a car engine running as smoke forms from thin air and begins to swirl around Thomas, wrapping up around his legs, running between them and covering his chest, then up around his neck before completely shrouding him. The smoke grows into a mass, no longer human-shaped, but a tube that begins to stretch towards the treetops. Then, in a split second, with the sound of the air around them beginning to crackle and sparks appearing in the air, the smoke slams back down sentiently around Thomas, who is now down on one knee, fist to earth. Warren rushes over as the man slouches like he's going to fall over.
I thought you said this was supposed to help.
Warren's scold dies in his mouth. He stops short of Thomas, whose head jerks up at him. His skin was still human-like, but much deeper, much like his brother's, but with a distinctly warm undertone that shows even in the dim light. His entire body glows dully, so faintly that Warren isn't sure whether his eyes are playing tricks on him at first. He sees the bumps he remembered that trace the features of Thomas's face, and notices that the two bumps at his temples are larger and flat. All the festering cuts and bruises were still there, less prominent on the deeper skin. Warren approaches slowly, unsure whether Thomas was the same person.
Is it okay?
Warren asks, kneeling closely enough that he can reach out and touch if he was allowed. Thomas nods, his eyes shifting like flames now, just as they had the day that Edward and Lila had almost killed him. Warren crawls over, spotting a large bruise on Thomas's opposite side down near his hip. Without thinking, Warren slides the threadbare underwear Thomas still wore down, his fingers under the fabric, placing his hand on the mark. Thomas's skin was burning up. He sucks in a breath.
Don't I scare you?
Thomas asks, his voice deeper, gravelly. Warren manages a weak chuckle, faking calm.
You haven't seen some of my boyfriends. I'm pretty sure my current lover crawled out of a hellmouth.
Warren jokes crudely, and then immediately freezes, wondering if somehow, healing a half-naked demon with his bare hands, he had overstepped a boundary. But Thomas laughs. The sound is throaty and gruff.
If you only knew how right you were,
Thomas says, as Warren slides his hands out from beneath the elastic. He looks up, no longer seeing the moon at all, spotting the glow of it through the trees facing the house now instead of above them.
This might be bad bedside manner, but what else can I touch? We don't have much time.
Warren asks.
can you try this? It's been killing me.
Thomas points to his face, and Warren cups the swollen half of it with one hand gently, placing his other hand on Thomas's forehead. Thomas smiles, leaning into the touch for a millisecond before his eyes snap back open, Warren barely able to suppress a recoil.
Can I ask, what are the bumps? And why do you look human still?
Warren is careful, and Thomas settles down, his eyes still trained on the man holding his face. Warren can't recall a time the man, or man-like creature, had looked at him in the eyes this long.
We all start out looking just like your people, taking on mostly features from our human parent. My father was a conquistador's great-great-grandson. We're raised by our human parent until we're around 12, and then our demon reclaims us. Puberty starts just like it did for you, but I didn't just sprout hair. I sprouted bumps all over my face. My father thought I had pox and sent me to a country estate. That's where Lila too found me. Each one of us has distinctive features. They grow over time, but more so after each conquest. My mother has her claws, Edward has his wings, and I have these nubs. Should be massive horns by now, but I haven't given them a reason to grow.
Thomas says, putting a finger to each of the flat, raised spots on his temples.
Wow. This is insane. Again, no offense.
Warren says, pulling his hands back to reveal a completely healed face. Thomas stands, and Warren is shocked. He hadn't realized with Thomas folded up on the ground, but he was now easily 7 feet tall, if not taller. His body was still slighter in proportion to his brother, but only marginally. His chest heaves up as he takes a full breath, the muscles bouncing involuntarily. Warren doesn't mean to stare, but as his eyes travel down, he can't help but notice that the white underwear Thomas was still wearing was considerably tighter and much fuller. Warren looks back at Thomas's face quickly. He has huge round bruises on either side of his chest, and Warren motions for him to lean down. He does, and Warren spreads his fingers wide, covering the bruises, no doubt from relentless beating at the hands of his brother, and can feel the skin grow impossibly hotter. Thomas's chest rumbles, and Warren can look up and see the demon smiling, his canines much longer than a human's, overlapping the opposite row of teeth. The bruises dissipate, and Warren doesn't see any other major areas of damage. Thomas leans back up, stretching his massive arms, and groans in satisfaction.
You saved me. Warren, I wouldn't have made it another night. I barely made it here.
Thomas says, a peak of morning light stabbing into the dim clearing.
Well, it was my pleasure. Happy to help the guy, person who isn't trying to kill my family, or me, or steal my sperm. Now, how long do you think you have before you need me again?
Warren asks as the rumbling begins.
I will degrade again as soon as you wake up in that house, as long as I hide out here.
Thomas says, his unnaturally deep voice drowning out the sound of Warren's mind splitting.
So, how do I get you back in the house, back near me?
Warren asks as the rumbling grows.
I don't know.
Thomas says, as the black fog rushes down the hill behind the house towards them.
I have an idea. Just stay hidden until I come and get you. Can you hold out a little longer?
Warren asks, a half-cocked idea in his head as he scrambles wildly through the leaves and brush at the edge of the clearing. He finds what he's looking for, a leaf with 5 points growing on a low vine at the base of an old pine tree. Warren rubs it aggressively on his arms, looking up at Thomas, who nods confusedly as the black smoke envelops him. Warren shuts his eyes tight, keeping the image of Thomas in his mind, hoping it will carry over into his day self, hoping he would play into his own plan if the image was left here in the clearing. Okay, we're back, and my neighbors have decided that now is the time in which I guess their dogs just run in circles for like an hour. I don't know. I also have laundry I need to do. I've got a lot of things I need to do, so let's make this quick. So, we've kind of got the flip side of the last chapter. Warren switches brothers. We're giving very much Twilight vibes. Very, is it Edward? Oh, I didn't even think about that. Is it Edward? Is it Jacob? I just picked a name. I guess I could change it if I ever cared, but I don't. Is it Edward? Is it Jacob? Which one will he choose? But not really, because the protagonist of that story, I guess we could call her a protagonist. Bella is fully informed of what's going on around her the whole time. So we've got the switch. So now we're getting even more information. We still don't have all of it because as I wrote it and then I finished it and I thought this chapter is great. I gave all the extra information you need. There's still a couple questions that I need to answer. One question is, and it always slips my mind as soon as I'm done reading it, but it's, how is it that Lila, Edward, and Thomas, if he was functioning as he normally would, how is it that they don't realize that Warren is just like wandering around at night? Like, what's going on there? We'll address that later. We'll have an answer for it. But a lot of other questions were answered here. So the long and short of it is, basically, men are stupid. I love that as a theme, personally. I think it's great. And specifically what this chapter says, no offense to my straights out there, but straight men are particularly susceptible to anything they find attractive offering itself to them. Why did I choose that as the reason why Warren is unaffected or still not alive, but why is it that he hasn't given in or why is it that he's not become the object that they can all just kind of continuously use until he's no longer useful? Because most of his ancestors, we can assume and can kind of tell that they're older when they show up. So it's probably pretty exciting to them to have a, not to be gross, but like a younger, more virile male specimen. So why did I choose to make it this way? Why did I basically say all of them are stupid? Because, let's tie this back to being queer, because that's what I do with literally everything. Warren has exhibited all of these signs of being careful, of being wary, of taking too many thoughts when it comes to the situation around him, right? And there's this, I don't want to say like a misinformation, but there's this incorrect assumption that queer people are just like, gay men specifically, are just like super promiscuous and not careful and ridiculous. Now, if you want to be promiscuous, more power to you. And not even promiscuous so much, but like there's this idea that gay men are just like fuck monsters who like don't care what's going on in the world around them, and they're just like gonna fuck whenever they want. Number one, in my experience, not the case. Number two, more importantly, that is not the case. And I kind of, is it too deep to interpret? Is it too deep to assume? I don't think so. Warren acts this way because he is queer. He grew up in the South. He grew up with a family that kind of was just like, this is not it, girly. We're not doing this. We don't love this for you. And so he, like most, I would venture to say most queer people in general, not even just gay men, most queer people in general develop this innate sense of self-preservation that goes above and beyond what any, like, I'll say it once, I'll say it again, straight white man, that goes above and beyond what any straight white man would do, or what most straight white men would do, right? Because the assumption with an incubus or a succubus, when it comes to cultures or when it comes to like historical, biblical, just textual references of them, is that they're like irresistible, right? But the thing is that they're not irresistible. So when it comes to them being a religious icon, they are resistible, right? The whole point is that you can resist them if you're strong enough. It just shows a weakness of the flesh. Now, am I applying that to the general every straight man? Yeah, kind of, but more specifically just Warren's ancestors. So I like that in this chapter, Thomas is just kind of like, yeah, we don't know how it is that you're able to do this. He doesn't know. And Warren doesn't really think it through that far. But if you do look at this as a queer person, even in a fantasy world that is not real, when you kind of think about it, queer people in general, in my experience, and all queer people that I know, we all kind of go into every situation, whether it be like picking someone to hook up with or picking someone to date or picking people that we just feel safe enough to be ourselves around. We're much more careful about it than our straight counterparts. In general, that's just kind of a thing that I've noticed. So that discretion, or maybe not even discretion, but that extra 2-3 steps of security is what separates Warren, but also is what makes him, I don't want to say stronger, but certainly a more formidable opponent than his ancestors, because, okay, let's make it even more queer. His ancestors have all been presumably straight white men. And so they go to this like manor, and they're just there, and a beautiful woman presents herself to them. If most of them are older, that means most of them either don't have spouses or their spouses are already dead. So they're just like, here you go. It's like they don't even have a second thought about it. There is no suspicion because the world around them has always been theirs for the taking. Warren is a queer person in the same situation, and yet he doesn't take the same advantages. Number one, because he isn't attracted to Lila, but even when Thomas, who is kind of, his physical appearance is catered to what they have found Warren is attracted to, and Edward for a long time, he just doesn't give in. because he's queer. Not because he's queer, but being queer and having to be careful and having to condition yourself to operate in a straight person's world where it's literally dangerous to be who you are in some situations has now led him to a point in which it's working in his favor. I guess what I always do is create a world in which a queer main character is in a world in which their queerness is not a detriment to them, or it may be a source of contention or conflict, but at the end they come out to be the stronger one. I find that very interesting. I don't do it on purpose. Like, everything I write is of course queer, but it doesn't mean that I have an intention before I do everything, right? So that's one of the big things that they covered. The other thing that was kind of a question that I was mulling over, thinking, how am I going to answer this? How is this going to make sense? Is how is it that when these people, his ancestors, his male predecessors, wake up in this dream state and all their memories come back, and the fact that even in the most basic situations, Lila has changed the way that she looks, and they remember that she used to look one way and now she looks or sounds or is a different person. How is it that they're able to blindly look over that and just go with it, right? They're under the assumption that they're in a dream, but I feel like most people, even when you're in a dream, you have some level of self-awareness. Like, you still have a basic personality and thought processes. It might not be the case for everyone, but I think it is for a lot of people. So, how then do I kind of explain that? Well, let's just say demons can still lie to you, right? Because their whole thing, and my whole thing with doing this and using incubuses and succubuses, which in some historical or cultural versions or iterations of what they are, do not care about consent. They don't. In my version, in my world, because they're not a real thing, I've decided that they have to have consent. That's an unspoken rule. We do it with all sorts of different mythical supernatural creatures. Some vampires sparkle in the sun. Some vampires burn up and die in the sun. Some of them are just weakened by the sun. We've seen True Blood. We've seen the Vampire Diaries. We've seen Twilight, New Moon, the Eclipse, and Breaking Dawn Part 1 and Part 2. We've all seen them. And there's different versions of vampires, but they're all quintessentially the same thing. I'm doing the same thing with incubuses and succubuses. They have to have consent. But how then, you ask, can they gain consent if the person that they're aimed at is seeing reality shift and change around them? Number one, I make the generalization that straight men who see someone that they're attracted to in front of them really don't care that much because, number one, they know that it's a dream. And number two, it's a beautiful person offering themselves to them in a dream. They're going to do it. But there's also well, what if they don't want to do that, right? What if you have someone more like Warren's grandfather, who's smarter, who's wiser, who is obviously, as a ghost, is like, this isn't right. In life, probably said the same thing. How do you justify that? Okay, well, demons can lie. Just because they have to have consent doesn't mean they can't lie, right? Which technically, when you really think about it, lying, if you lie to someone under the pretenses of having sex with them, then it's not really consent. But they're demons, right? They're demons. It's the best workaround we can really get. I mean, we've all watched the Vampire Diaries. We've all watched True Blood. We've all watched a lot of things. Were they dishonest in Twilight? No, they were pretty honest and stupid in Twilight. But with most other shows, there's always the redaction or exclusion of information. We don't ever have a problem with that. So to me, it didn't seem like a huge problem to just say, well, demons can lie. Most of the time, they probably don't need to because the target that they've set their sights on is probably not that picky if it's an old man. I hate to generalize. I don't hate to generalize. I don't feel bad for old white men. I don't. I need to start saying that more often. Now, if they're like sick and sad, that's sad. But I don't feel bad for them in the context of like making generalizations. Maybe that's just because where I grew up, that's how old men operate. They're gross. not to shame anybody, not to shame if you're an old man. First of all, love it. Let me know. But more importantly, straight white men. I'm going to generalize it there because I don't really care about offending straight white men. If you're an older gay man, I don't want to offend you. I appreciate you existing. But I digress. I put my hands in the air. You can't see it, but I'm putting my hands in the air unless you're watching. Now, were there any other questions that I did answer? I do like that when he's a demon, he still looks human. I also gave him a backstory. I had to do some research because I didn't remember when conquistadors were active. I thought it was in the 1600s, but then I thought, was it the 1400s? Turns out I was wrong both times. It was the 1500s. We've already established that Thomas was born in 62, so 17th century. So he became a conquistador's great-great-grandson. Makes sense. It also kind of, when you think of, it also gives sort of, this might be problematic, let me know if it is, but I try and think of it this way. It gives me a little more play with the imagining of what he looks like, right? Because we can kind of just get, like, you think about this. Are you ready to think about this? We think about the traditional paintings of, like, Jesus by Da Vinci. Those are, most of our modern interpretations of Jesus are based off of Da Vinci, who is just a gay guy who was hooking up with his cousin. So the Jesus that we know right now is just like a 16th century Italian twink that was engaging in incest. Again, don't shoot the messenger. But we kind of picture that Jesus now because he's so within the zeitgeist. That's the Jesus we picture, even though that's not what he would have looked like. And not how he was really described. He would have a much deeper complexion. He would not look like a white man who is like an Instagram influencer, which is what he looks like in most pictures of it, or paintings of him or carvings of him. He wouldn't look like that. So we can take the assumption that a lot of people, when reading or hearing that he was a Spanish conquistador's great-great-grandson, they pictured those paintings of Spanish conquistadors. When people were painted and when people lived in that time period, being as pale as possible, so avoiding kind of your natural skin tone by just not going in the sun if you were rich, did make you paler. It also made you sicker. So depending on how you think of historically what a person in that time period in that area would look like traditionally, especially because back then there was less like commingling of people of different nationalities and races and colors and things like that, depends on how you think of him. Like that's just kind of how I went with it. Again, I just try and think of the most general, easiest way to give you multiple directions, right? I did say that he has a deeper skin tone, but, and it's a big but, and it's not my but. Remember that before this, he didn't really look like, he kind of looked like Edward, but he was a toned down version of Edward. And we don't get as many thorough descriptions of him once Edward is kind of in the picture, because it's not important to Warren anymore. Now he's got someone he wants to have sex with. He doesn't, well, does he want to have sex with Thomas? That's the question, because he is still a man and men are trash. I just keep putting my hands up because I don't know what else to say. We just make generalizations, but it's hard to apologize for making generalizations about, number one, a group in which I'm a part of, which is the cisgender straight passing club. Cisgender white passing. I guess sometimes I'm straight passing, not with this haircut, but sometimes crowds. I can poke fun at that. Also, it's hard to feel bad for a group of people who have historically held power for hundreds and thousands of years and have screwed it up time and time again. So I don't feel that bad. But now we've got even more context to who Thomas is, why he acts the way he does. Also, fun little tidbit I just threw in there was that each different incubus and succubus has their own distinct feature that grows and matures with their conquests and with their age. The wings are cool for Edward, but they're kind of scary, and they're like, I don't know. The wings would have been kind of cool for Thomas, but they didn't really. It wouldn't. Horns would not have made him nearly as scary or as threatening as wings did. When he attacks Warren the first time, he kind of is like confused and trying to get out of there. Also, like, wings are, think about little chicken wings on Thomas's back. That's not very cute or sexy or fun. So I thought nubs instead of horns, giving you very much that Panic at the Disco music video where he's like demon face, but like with regular colored skin, not like borderline offensive, like gray scale skin. But that's not important. Like I said, I have laundry to do. I have to edit this. Also, I am going for a socially distant vacation tomorrow for like 2 days to a cabin in the woods. So I need to get ready for that. So was this pre-recorded? Was it not? You'll never know. But here's the thing. I'm going to be at home whenever you think about showing up if you're thinking about robbing me. Also, why would you rob me, really? I'm the person you want to rob, some random dummy on the internet. Anyway, I'll be back next week. I like this chapter. Next chapter, as I was writing the ending of this chapter, I was like, oh, that's kind of clever. And I left it just open enough so that, he's rubbing this. I keep hitting that wire. He's rubbing poison oak on his arms, right? And it's like, oh, how is he doing it? We're not super specific. But could he be possibly rubbing it in the shape of a T or a TH or a THOMAS on his arm? We just don't know. But we'll find out next week. As always, I like to thank you for listening or watching if you are, which I know you're not, but I do want you to know I look particularly good today. I've got one curl in the middle of my forehead, and I'm just far enough from the camera so that you can't see anything up close. Also, let's pay attention to, I'm going to link in the bio, and usually that's what I do, is link in the bio or in like the show description for the charity or for the organization or group or GoFundMe this week in support of Black Lives. A lot of people are doing like Texas fundraisers right now. I would do that, but I don't know that much about doing that. And also, I'd like to keep the momentum going for, I hate to say it, but a much longer ongoing process and issue than short-term issues in Texas. So if you're in Texas, I'm very sorry if you're cold, which you're not cold anymore. Hate to see what's happening there. Hate it. But I'm going to stick with Black Lives Matter for right now. Only because all the YouTubers have already hopped on the fun Texas thing. So, also, this is a little more curated. We're not talking about Texas here. We're talking about being queer. How does that... Well, queer people are marginalized. Black people are marginalized. There's your relation. Also, I'm black. I know. White passing, but, If you saw my birth certificate, which is right over here, but I can't show you, it does say black. It does not say white on it. It says... Does it say black or African American? I think it says African American. Whatever. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you listening. Now, I'm going to get this little clicker, and I'm going to get it ready so that when I hit the button, I don't sit here looking like an idiot. So, ready? Okay. Thanks for listening or watching.